Okay, I think we'll get started. The joint hearing will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the hearing at any time. Welcome today. Today's hearing is entitled Return on Unprecedented Investment, an analysis of the Department of Energy's implementation of the IIJA, the IRA, and the CHIPS and Sciences Act. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Good afternoon. Today, the Energy Subcommittee and the Investigations and Oversight Subcommittee are holding a joint hearing on the Department of Energy's implementation of the recently passed R&D legislation, including the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, and the CHIPS and Science Act. With the passage of the IIJA and the IRA, the Department of Energy received an astonishing $97 billion in additional funding outside of the regular appropriations process, of which $45 billion falls under this committee's jurisdiction. According to the department, this massive infusion of taxpayer dollars will be used to stand up over 70 new Department of Energy programs and hire over 1,000 new employees. To facilitate this, the Department of Energy recently completed a department-wide reorganization, which included the creation of the Office of the Undersecretary for Infrastructure to manage this expansion of programs. With this massive and historic public investment in our energy future, and with an overhaul of the federal department tasked with administering these funds, I personally am astonished and concerned that the leader of this office has yet to be confirmed by the Senate. The Department of Energy's recent facelift has rightfully received criticism from both industry and lawmakers. As members of Congress, we have a responsibility to conduct oversight of these immense new activities. I believe that we have a responsibility to question whether DOE has the protections, personnel, and expertise in place to carry out the IIJA and IRA appropriately. Just last year, the DOE announced a $200 million IIJA award to Microvast, a company with over 80% of its assets in China. Microvast is even listed on the SEC watch list of foreign companies not in compliance with the Holding Foreign Companies Accountability Act. I think we can all agree the department's failure to adequately vet this company before making this $200 million award is unacceptable and deeply alarming. The committee is also seriously concerned about the DOE's recent reorganization. Through the IIJA, the department created the new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, which received $27 billion in appropriations. Last week, Chairman Lucas and I sent a letter to the Secretary highlighting our concerns with this new office and the department's lack of clear guidance for its coordination with existing DOE demonstration activities. Since tens of billions of taxpayer dollars are at stake, I look forward to receiving a response from the department soon on this letter. We're not just here to talk about the IIJA and IRA, we're also here to review the DOE's implementation of the CHIPS and Science Act, a House Science Committee product which correctly prioritizes fundamental and basic research carried out through the DOE Office of Science. Unlike applied research, which the private sector is capable of funding and conducting on its own, the Office of Science supports the kind of fundamental research and specialized research infrastructure that is uniquely stewarded by the federal government. Over the years, Office of Science research in areas like nuclear physics, basic energy sciences, and advanced scientific computing have been instrumental to our competitiveness, to our nation's competitiveness and economic growth. The CHIPS and Science authorization is a critical program to direct these essential activities and includes robust funding profiles for user facilities such as the Electron-Ion Collider at Brookhaven National Laboratory in my state of New York. And I look forward to visiting that this summer. Very cool to be able to get eyes on that. Set to be completed in 2034, the EIC will answer fundamental questions regarding the inner workings of protons, neutrons, and electrons, and much more. The innovations and discoveries gained from this facility may unlock a new age in computing, energy, and medicine, just as the discovery of the atom did for the last 100 years. CHIPS and Science also leverages DOE's groundbreaking R&D capabilities to accelerate innovation in microelectronics, domestic chip production, and the work that has the potential to create tens of thousands of jobs in my district in New York. We are trying to prioritize our taxpayer dollars on all of these programs. So today, despite the impact of the Office of Science, many of the programs in CHIPS and Science Act have yet to receive adequate support in the President's fiscal year 2024, and I find this odd given our recent IRA and IIJA windfall. So the DOE looks like it's more concerned with doubling down on well-funded applied energy programs than supporting the Office of Science. And these are the kinds of misplaced priorities that could jeopardize our leadership in science and technology for decades to come. I want to thank our witnesses for the testimony. I appreciate gathering of the committee, and I look forward to your answers. As I would now like to recognize the ranking member of the Investigations and Oversight Committee, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Williams and Chairman Obernolte, for holding this joint subcommittee hearing today. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the transformational investments made by the 117th Congress in research, development, and demonstration programs overseen by the Department of Energy. DOE is poised to play a vital role in addressing our most pressing energy challenges of the 21st century. From battery storage and solar technology to grid efficiency and nuclear fusion, DOE's research portfolio represents a vast and multifaceted investment in America's economy, its workers, and its energy security. Districts all across America benefit from this investment. For example, a consortium of 4 research universities in my district, North Carolina's 4th, jointly hosts the Triangle University's Nuclear Laboratory, a DOE Center of Excellence. I have no doubt that many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle can cite similar initiatives in their own districts, and I hope to learn more about them today. Laws like the CHIPS and Science Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act will strengthen the impact of DOE science programs many times over. These laws are empowering DOE to support basic energy research, develop energy-related technological breakthroughs at scale, and accelerate America's transition to clean energy sources. I support these laws wholeheartedly, and I believe that they will make America stronger and more prosperous. I also support good faith congressional oversight of the implementation of these laws. Congress has directed significant funding increases to DOE science in recent years. Assessing the department's management of those funds is appropriate and necessary to ensure that the agency is using taxpayer dollars wisely and acting consistently with congressional intent. At the same time, I would caution against any unnecessary politicization of DOE's research and development activities. DOE science is primed to support critical investments that will bolster emerging energy sector industries and create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs for people all across this country to participate in for years to come. Congressional scrutiny of these programs should be rigorous, but we must also be cautious not to undercut these essential investments and jeopardize the jobs and economic activity poised to emerge from them. Our constituents are counting on these investments, and we need to deliver them. The goal of our oversight should always be to improve the research programs that we look at, not to tear them down. That is why I intend to approach my oversight of the department. I want a DOE that is more capable and more effective in implementing the vision Congress has set forth. I am also excited to use today's hearing to highlight DOE's incredible scientific and technological capabilities. DOE's scientific infrastructure is a crown jewel in the federal research enterprise. The department's national laboratories, its scientific offices, and its partnerships with public, private, and academic institutions stand at the frontier of breakthrough research in the energy technologies of tomorrow. I am eager to learn more from our witnesses about how DOE intends to maximize these resources at its disposal in support of a stronger, safer, and more equitable energy future. Congress has set forth lofty goals, and now we are counting on DOE to deliver. I am confident that you can do it, and I am grateful to both of you, as well as all of the scientists who work at and with the department, for your commitment and your dedication to public service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Fushi. And I would say to our guests and also to my fellow members on the committee that that Ms. Fushi and I could sit so close together is a good sign, because she represents the Tar Heels and I represent the Syracuse Orange. That was a very dangerous look there, but anyway, thank you for your comments. I now recognize the chairman of the Investigation and Oversight Subcommittee, the gentleman from California, for his opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for this very important hearing. 3 weeks ago, the Subcommittee on Investigations and Oversight held a subcommittee hearing in which we heard testimony from nearly all of the offices of inspector generals within the jurisdiction of this policy committee, including the Energy IG. One of the things that came out of that hearing that was really alarming to me was testimony from them almost universally saying that they didn't have the resources in their departments to conduct oversight of the many hundreds of billions of dollars of additional funding under IIJA and IRA that were being provided to these agencies. Obviously, this, I think, is an oversight of Congress that funding was not specifically appropriated for the IGs to conduct oversight of the extra funding that we're awarding these agencies. Now, of the billions of dollars that Congress has appropriated to specifically the Department of Energy, the vast majority has yet to be spent. And so one of the things that I would like to discuss in this hearing is my hopes that some of the funding that has been appropriated can be allocated to the OIG within energy to make sure that some of the problems that have occurred in the past in departments across our federal bureaucracy do not occur when we are spending the money that's been appropriated here, because I think we're all united in our desire to make sure that this money is wisely and appropriately spent and that we're doing the good science that was intended with it. Also, I'm going to be interested today in hearing answers to some of the questions posed in a letter that Chairman Williams and I sent at the beginning of April to the department regarding what we consider the clear conflicts of interest exhibited by department employees in owning stock in some of the same energy companies that they regulate. Now, in an amazing coincidence of timing, we did finally receive a response to our letter late last night. However, I would consider the response to be wholly insufficient. Unfortunately, I think this is part of an ongoing trend. 2 weeks ago, Senator Hawley asked Secretary Granholm questions on this same matter and also did not receive adequate responses. And let me just say that I think we're all on the same team here. We are trying to do our duty as members of the legislative branch in providing oversight, and I know the OIGs in these departments are trying to do exactly the same thing. So we should be unified in our interests in getting to the bottom of this. So I'll be asking questions about that today. I think it's still very important that Congress know why the department has not provided substantive responses to the questions that we posed in our letter. And I also am interested in talking to you about how anyone could possibly conclude that having department employees own stock in the same companies that they regulate is not a conflict of interest. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later in the hearing, but thank you again for your testimony today and for appearing in the hearing. I'm looking forward to the rest of the hearing and your testimony. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Obernolte. We are also joined by the chairman of the full committee, my colleague, Mr. Lucas. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. And I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us for today's important hearing. Last Congress, the Science Committee worked together on a historic achievement, passing the first comprehensive authorization of the DOE Office of Science in the CHIPS and Science Act. A decade in the making, this bipartisan bill was painstakingly vetted by stakeholders and the scientific community. It provides DOE with a bold yet responsible and realistic policy roadmap for its greatest asset, the Office of Science. It prioritizes the kind of work that industry is unable to support, fundamental research in high-priority areas like fusion energy sciences, material sciences, and advanced scientific computing, and the research infrastructure needed to make that happen. Today, I'm eager to receive an update on the implementation of this important law. But as we all know, CHIPS and Science was not the only DOE bill that became law last Congress. Today, in addition to carrying out our Science Committee direction provided by CHIPS and the Science Act, DOE is also continuing to implement the Biden administration's Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. In carrying out the IIJA and the IRA, DOE faces the daunting task of allocating nearly $50 billion in additional spending for a wide range of R&D programs within the Science Committee's jurisdiction. To put this in perspective, that is roughly 3 times the size of DOE's annual budget for corresponding programs. The alarming magnitude of the IIJA and the IRA spending is arguably too much for any agency to effectively absorb. And the manner of their passage, without adequate process of feedback from the committees of jurisdiction, should give us all pause. This is an unprecedented time for DOE, and the agency has a lot to answer for. So far, DOE's implementation of these laws, we've seen the department award hundreds of millions of dollars to a company with known ties to the CCP, stand up major program offices without offices under unconfirmed leadership, and chase after 1,000 new applied energy employees while losing essential career staff in the Office of Science. It's our job on the Science Committee to provide critical oversight for the implementation of both substantial research funding and comprehensive program direction. With the rapid injection of funding from the IIJA and the IRA, the significant investments authorized in CHIPS and Science, it is important we ensure DOE has effective plans in place to implement these laws in a way that maximizes the return on taxpayers' investments. While today's hearing will provide critical oversight of recently authorized activities and new spending, we also intend to conduct a broader review at the full committee of the department's operations and how it plans to contribute to America's scientific and technological competitiveness in the coming fiscal year and beyond. I look forward to arranging that hearing soon. And I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today, and I look forward to a productive discussion. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Representative Lofgren from California, for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chairman has mentioned, we have made huge advances in investments in science over the last few years. The Energy Act of 2020, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS and Science, and I do think it's important that we oversee the implementation of those bills. I know we all want the implementation to go well, and I am eager to join with the majority to sort through it and make sure that we're all on the same page and getting the investments we anticipated. I just want to note that 2 days ago, I had the distinct pleasure of visiting the Lawrence Livermore National Lab to celebrate the National Ignition Facility's landmark achievement of ignition last December. It was really a wonderful time to see all the scientists I've worked with since 1995 celebrating this moment. As the chairman has mentioned, there is a substantial investment in fusion, in chips and science, and I'm especially interested in how that is going. With that, so we can hear from the witnesses sooner rather than later, I'll ask unanimous consent to put the balance of my statement into the record. And you say without objection.
Without objection and with appreciation for the help. Okay. Yeah, so let me introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Dr. Kathleen Hogan, who is the Principal Deputy Undersecretary and Acting Undersecretary for Infrastructure at the U.S. Department of Energy. I now recognize Dr. Richmond for 5 minutes to present her testimony.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for having us here today, and good afternoon for working together with you to see us go forward. It is an opportunity for us to share with you how we're doing. And I'll discuss the bill and IRA first, and then I'll talk about chips and science. I want to start by thanking you for your attention to research and development in recent legislation. I can't thank you enough. In addition to their important implications for clean energy deployment and commercialization at scale, bill and IRA also invest in the critical research, development, and demonstration, which have long been at the heart of the department's mission. These investments will position the United States to continue to lead the world in these particular areas. The Inflation Reduction Act provided a much-needed $2 billion toward national laboratory infrastructure investments, which I'll tell you more about. These funds are being used to support infrastructure projects across the National Lab Complex, encompassing a wide range of significant improvements that were so desperately needed and scientific upgrades. The funding is also being invested in cutting-edge scientific tools that will support scientists across the nation, while also training the next generation of scientists, the next generation of needed scientists in critical and emerging technologies associated with these new cool tools. About $230 million is being used to upgrade our world-class X-ray, light, and neutron sources at our DOE laboratories that are used by thousands of researchers from companies and universities and from every state in the country. Equally impactful is the $190 million for the electron ion collider at Brookhaven National Laboratory that, once built, will lead the world in understanding how our universe works at its most fundamental level. And additional facilities, I could go on and on, but these are being developed to deliver more isotopes, critical isotopes for application, including in research, medical diagnostics and treatment, enhanced cellular imaging, and deep space missions. So other IRA funds have been invested to help make our laboratories safer, and this is really important. Make them safer and more efficient and productive places to work, such as upgrading water, power, HVAC services, some of which have been in service for over 7 decades. And may I just say that attracting young people to work at a laboratory that looks like it's 70 years old rather than brand new is a challenge. So these investments will make sure the nation's crown jewels of science and innovation continue to lead the world in scientific advances that will impact our nation's future economy and national security. The Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, or EERE, is using bill investments to accelerate research in recycling critical minerals and materials used for electric vehicle batteries, solar cells, wind turbines, hydrogen fuel cell technologies. EERE has already announced a selection of $73 million in projects for recycling of battery materials. And in December, EERE released the first funding opportunity for $45 million of the $225 million bill investments to support states, local building code agencies, and others in updating energy codes at the state and local level. These efforts have been coordinated with our work to implement the $1 billion IRA provisions on the latest codes. More energy-efficient buildings will save money for Americans, for American homes and businesses, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and enhance our grid resiliency. And in March, EERE announced the availability of $750 million for research, development, and demonstration efforts to dramatically reduce the cost of clean hydrogen. This funding will play a critical role in achieving commercial-scale hydrogen deployment this decade. And the CHIPS and Science Act is a historic bill designed to revitalize America's scientific research and technological leadership and strengthen America's economic and national security. This committee, I know, was instrumental in the passage of this CHIPS and Science Act, for which we are very, very grateful, both to the members and to the staff. And it is a tribute in particular to Jennifer Wicker, who I know contributed so much to CHIPS and Science and to the caliber of science policy in this country. CHIPS and Science was the first ever comprehensive authorization of the DOE Office of Science, authorizing $50 billion over 5 years to enable cutting-edge research and development in clean energy to fight the climate crisis and advance computing to boost American competitiveness. We have not yet received full appropriations to implement the activities authorized in CHIPS and Science, but we are working with the resources we have today to implement important CHIPS programs, such as the Foundation for Energy Security and Innovation, and to integrate its policy directives on research security and other matters. The President's fiscal 2024 budget request for the Office of Science supports key activities authorized in CHIPS and Science Act, including establishing up to 4 new microelectronics science research centers. These centers will perform mission-driven research and train the needed future workforce to address foundational challenges in the design, development, characterization, prototyping, demonstration, and fabrication of these microelectronics. Additionally, the request proposes major increases in fusion energy sciences program within the Office of Science, growing the program to over $1 billion. This increase will accelerate fusion development and in support of the administration's bold decadal vision for commercial fusion energy. Even with recent advances in fusion, significant research and innovation is needed, fundamental level and applied level, to support the development of the fusion pilot plant to meet our clean energy goals. The department is committed to quickly establishing these and other important programs authorized in CHIPS and Science Act once funding is appropriated. Thank you again, and I do look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Richmond. And I just will comment the activity at Brookhaven and the discovery of new isotopes. You'll have to come and update my chart of nuclides that hangs in my office with some of these discoveries. And I would just also note that you're a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, and privileged to have you here, so thank you. Our next witness today is Dr. Kathleen Hogan, Principal Deputy Undersecretary and Acting Undersecretary for Infrastructure at the U.S. Department of Energy. I recognize you, Dr. Richmond, for 5 minutes to present your testimony. I'm sorry, Dr. Hogan.
It's
for
okay.
5
We
minutes
work
to
like this
present.
too.
I always say I've been called worse. Many cases, a lot worse. I apologize, Dr. Hogan, for 5 minutes. Thank you.
So good. No, I too would like to thank you for this opportunity to provide an update on the Office of the Undersecretary for Infrastructure's progress to date in implementing the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, known as IIJA and IRA. We truly recognize these laws as historic investments in renewing American infrastructure for decades to come, and know that we are together rebuilding American manufacturing and increasing American competitiveness. We're creating millions of lasting, good-paying jobs throughout our country, and we're reducing energy costs for our fellow Americans and improving our energy security. We also know that the IIJA was the culmination of years and years of this committee's work and vision, including the critical Bipartisan Energy Act of 2020. And on the behalf of the department, we really do thank you all and your staffs for your leadership and ongoing partnership in this work. You know, through IIJA and IRA, as you pointed out, Congress has committed to invest more than $90 billion over multiple years for the Department of Energy to administer. And in the 18 months since the IIJA was signed into law, DOE has already made more than $38 billion available. And in the 9 months since the enactment of the Inflation Reduction Act, we have made more than $7 billion available so that communities across the country and your districts can benefit as quickly as possible. But we're also doing what we need to do this work right. So that is why last year we completed a major realignment at the department to ensure that we could have maximum impact, strong oversight, and integrity throughout our work. The creation of this new office, the Office of the Undersecretary for Infrastructure, helps us concentrate expertise and focus on the demonstration and deployment of cutting-edge energy technologies, and it completes an organizational change that the Department of Energy long contemplated. We also, I would like to point out, have very regular check-ins with our Office of Inspector General to learn about the steps we can take to protect against fraud, waste, and abuse, and we have hired hundreds of new team members, merging the knowledge of dedicated career civil servants with the expertise of industry veterans, connecting every corner of the country with the historic opportunities that we have through grants, formula funding, rebates, and loan programs. Just a few highlights of our work to date. With the historic resources for hydrogen, we've developed a national clean hydrogen strategy and roadmap. Our applications just closed for the $7 billion in regional clean hydrogen hubs, with selection slated for later this year. And we have issued announcements for another $750 million for electrolyzer manufacturing R&D. On game-changing grid resiliency and power generation programs, we've made a $1.1 billion conditional commitment to Diablo Canyon Nuclear Generating Station in California so they can keep the doors open and have low-carbon, zero-carbon power. We've made $2.3 billion available to states and tribes to strengthen our nation's power grid against wildfires, extreme weather, and other natural disasters. And just earlier this week, opened applications for enhanced hydroelectric production incentives included in the IIJA. We've also invested in our domestic battery manufacturing capabilities and capacity with $3 billion made available for battery manufacturing and recycling grants, and we expect another $3 billion funding opportunity to be available soon. And then by working with the private sector to launch demonstration projects and deploy new technologies, we have seen more than $435 billion in private investment in the United States since 2021. These investments are coming in the semiconductor, clean energy, EV and battery technology, biomanufacturing, and heavy industry sectors, showing that the investment that Congress has made through the IIJA and IRA are really having cascading effects across our economy. So, as the department continues our implementation of the IIJA and IRA, we really do look forward to the continued guidance of this committee while we work to bring about a clean and secure energy future that is made in America and creates hundreds of thousands of American jobs. And I also, on behalf of the department, really do appreciate the committee's interest, the opportunity to provide this testimony today, and again, as well as my colleague, look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hogan, and thank you both for your testimony. I'd like to just keep things moving, and I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. The Office of Science is charged with maintaining our country's competitiveness in a lot of different fronts, and one of those is fusion. I really believe in public-private partnerships and have met with many of the fusion companies that are privately funded. In fact, there have been billions of dollars of private investment that have gone into a number of different approaches to fusion technologies. So my question for both of you, in the IIJA and the IRA, it appears to me that the commercial partners, the private partners, seem to have been left behind in the fusion industry and have received an inadequate amount of federal funds compared to other energy sources, some of which, Dr. Hogan, you just listed. How does the administration plan to support this commercial pursuit of fusion? I've heard boasts of fusion power on the grid in 10 years. Love to see that. But how do we, given the recent accomplishments that you both have talked about with the ignition demonstration, where do we go from here in terms of getting commercial fusion in the market?
Well, I'll take that one. There couldn't be a more exciting time than now for fusion. There's no question about it. And we have a decadal goal for fusion, in which we have milestone programs in order to get to that point, particularly a milestone-based fusion development program. And we'll be launching that very soon. But the point is that there are successes, and NIF is a huge success. And let me just say, we are here with NIF with its success because of 40 years of funding of basic science, right? Plasma physics. I'm half physicist, half chemist, so I get this. This kind of science, this kind of investment, we're finally seeing pay off. That said, we have yet to determine which of the different types of models, whether it be a stellarator or a tokamak or a NIF or any new ones coming down the line, really are the ones to go. But companies are investing in these now, putting forth. There's a press release that came out this morning that's just very exciting, promising to have a fusion pilot plant, I think, by 2028, 29. Anyway, but the point is that companies are investing in this now, and they're going forward. But what they're not investing in is the really fundamental science, the plasma physics, that needs to be done. So what we're doing in the Office of Science is to have both the fundamental science going on, as well as put the applications in there too, and all the computer modeling that goes with that, while we're also then funding projects like ITER in France, and also D3D in Southern California. So we have this mix of basic and applied, but it's really to de-risk this going forward, so companies feel more comfortable going forward. But I think it's a good model. I think it's a good model because of the fact that we're not at the point where we would say it's a TRL level of 7 or 8. There's a whole lot of uncertainty that still resides there, and that's where the fundamental science comes in.
If I may just follow up with that, and I very much appreciate investment in fundamental science and of thousands of hours supervising the operation of nuclear power plants. But our meeting here today is really about this extraordinary amount of money that we're putting forth. And we have some promise, particularly around fusion. We have, as you mentioned, an announcement this morning, which I've not seen, so thank you for that. It does concern me that with all of this money, we seem to be focused elsewhere and starting 70 new programs instead of really refining and investing in the ones that are going to make a difference in the cost, reliability, resiliency, and affordability of power for average Americans. So I look forward to learning more about that. Just one last question, if we can, in the few seconds remaining. When it comes to China, and when it comes to the amount of money that we're spending, how do you see this as being critical to our competition with China, specifically in the fusion, in the area of fusion or other advanced technologies?
Thank you for that question, and thank you also for sharing your concerns about the amount of funding going into fusion and so forth, because it's something we look forward to working with you on. We don't know how much money China is putting into fusion right now, and so at this point we don't know that. But what we do know is that with NIF as an example, we have the tools here to do it, but if you took any other country and gave them these tools, they would not have the kind of scientists that we've had to pull this off. So that's where we compete. Having
a deep bench.
Yeah, a deep bench.
Thank you. I want to respect Ms. Fucci's time. I now recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you both for appearing before the committee today. I don't think I need to sell either of you or anyone else here on the importance of manufacturing to both our clean energy future and our global economic competitiveness. I'd like to talk about DOE's Clean Energy Manufacturing Institutes. One of these institutes, Power America, is located at North Carolina State University and has been very successful over the past decade in advancing semiconductor manufacturing. But today, despite the importance of this technology to our nation, Power America is only able to support a small fraction of the work compared to its peak because its initial federal funding period has lapsed. This committee did work to reauthorize the Manufacturing USA program writ in 2019, which included language that would allow renewal of funding for existing institutes. I have been pleased to see the department's commitment to realizing the full potential of these institutes by providing the framework last summer for these institutes to apply for renewal. I was also encouraged to see the announcement last month from the department that one of the institutes has received renewal funding for the first time. This follows a few years of appropriations and budget requests, which have further highlighted the importance of these institutes. So this question is for both witnesses. Will you please provide an update on how effective the framework process has been thus far, and if you have any plans to renew any other existing institutes?
Well, thank you very much for that question. Let me give you a little bit of where we're going with this. So we've initiated the renewal process with 4 of our 6 institutes, including Power America. The process itself takes about 6 months to complete, and as you mentioned, we've already completed the process with one of the institutes, the Composites Institute. Power America is the next closest to reaching the end of the process, with the other 2, the Rapid Institute and CES-MII, not far behind. As part of our framework for renewal, we evaluate the alignment of future work and institute purposes with national needs and the missions and objectives of the department. We also assess the adequacy of the institute in achieving its goals and trade-offs between dedicating funds to continued institute operations versus other mechanisms. Experts both within the department and the academic and industrial communities in which we work participate in this assessment, and we believe that the framework has been effective at assessing the benefits of the continued institute investment, while also identifying opportunities for improvement of the institute's next phase, should they be renewed. Kathleen, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think this is.
Oh.
Okay. Well, does the department have any plans to solicit funding for any new institutes, and if so, on what topic?
So the department is not currently requesting funding for new institutes as we prioritize the work that is needed for the clean energy transition and to meet our climate goals. Manufacturing USA institutes are an important tool in our toolkit and will be applied to areas where institutes would prove benefits above and beyond what other funding mechanisms could. So that's where we sit right now.
This question also is for both or either of you. I'd like to switch topics and focus on the department's broader funding management. DOE's grant and loan programs are essential to the development of new energy sources and the expansion of America's domestic energy infrastructure. These programs have been supercharged by the landmark achievements of the 117th Congress to the benefit of our economy, our energy security, and our environment. In order to fully realize these benefits, DOE must be a careful steward of the funding that has been directed to it. I would want to learn more about the safeguards that DOE has put in place to ensure that grant and loan programs spend money wisely and conscientiously. So can either of you again describe how DOE manages the funds being awarded to grant and loan recipients, and how DOE evaluates those funds over time to affirm that they are advancing the policy priorities of the department?
Yeah, and I'll take this one, and thank you for the question. And I think I'll use the example of our Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. One of the reasons we really leaned in on this office that was really created through our in 2021 was because of the competencies that we believe are essential to managing large-scale demonstrations. And as we've pointed out, there's a lot of the money through IIJA and IIJA that are being managed through this office. So what have we done there? We have coalesced a workforce that is highly skilled in large-scale project management. And we have also brought forth a team for inside that group, but separate, for independent technical reviews as we proceed over time. And in addition to that, we are establishing a new capability within the department for a demonstration and deployment advisory board. We're the government, so we gave it the acronym, the DDAB. So if you hear DDAB, you'll know what that stands for. So a multi-layered approach to ensure that we have the best tools in the federal government being brought to bear on what we all acknowledge is a lot of money, but money that, if managed well, can have an amazing impact across our country around things like clean hydrogen, long-duration energy storage, and other very advantageous technologies.
Thank you for that response. That's my time, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
I now recognize Mr. Obernolte for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Richmond, in my opening statement, I talked about my concerns about the fact that the OIG within the Department of Energy is so under-resourced. Recent legislation has awarded over $128 billion in newly appropriated funding to the department, as well as $350 billion in new loan authority. And of that, my reading of the budget is that the OIG was given less than 0.1% of that funding to oversee that. When we had our hearing several weeks ago, Terry Donaldson, the Inspector General for the Department of Energy, testified, and I wrote it down because it had such an impact on me. She said, the department is so dramatically under-resourced that she is compelled to mention it anytime she's on the Hill. So I find that pretty alarming. What is the department doing to make sure that the OIG has the resources that they need to oversee this new funding?
Well, thank you very much for raising that concern, because we want to make sure that we're doing everything right and legally. So, you know, I think DOE is committed to maintaining the public trust in the government, committed to transparency and accountability in the operations of the government. And so what we're working very hard on is to make sure that we achieve the ethics that are necessary. We're working diligently to ensure that staff is aware of and following the letter of the spirit of ethics laws and regulations to ensure the American
I'm
people.
sorry, Dr. Richmond, I was asking about these. We'll get to the letter. We can
All
do
right.
that first if you want.
Okay.
But I was asking about funding for the OIG.
Oh, well, in that case, we'll certainly take it under consideration, because that's not one that I'm as familiar with, but Kathleen is certainly more familiar with.
Dr. Hogan?
And certainly we are aware of the issues with that funding. I had the opportunity to testify in front of an oversight committee with our Inspector General, and certainly that was a major topic there. And you know, we're looking at that in the department. We certainly support everybody having the resources that they need to do their work around oversight. You know, the other things that we are doing in the department around oversight is very active engagement with our Inspector General. You know, they have an amazing history of knowing where to look for fraud, waste, and abuse from, you know, past things that they've looked at. They're sharing all of that with the current team. They're training up our new people.
Oh, they were I was very impressed in the hearing at the level of effort. I'm just concerned that there aren't enough eyeballs. So will you commit to looking for ways to try and steer some additional funding to the OIG to make sure that oversight can occur?
We will look throughout the department to see what we can do
Great,
there.
I appreciate that. Dr. Richmond, getting back to the issue of the letter that Chairman Williams and I sent regarding the recent letter that we had sent on the large number of trades in energy company stocks that were made by DOE employees. I mean, you understand that this is an allegation of wrongdoing. I understand what department policy says. The problem is we are all public servants.
That's right.
And the public perception when a third of the senior management at DOE has been trading in the same stocks that they oversee, that's very bad public perception. So what should policy be in this respect?
Well, in this case, DOE's most recent ethics program review conducted by the Office of Government Ethics disclosed absolutely no issues with the quality of the ethics advice given to the employees. Ethics advice is readily available to any employee.
Sure. I understand all of this,
Yeah.
and you provided this in your response to us.
Yes.
But I'm asking you, What do you think? Because we have a perception problem here. The average American is not going to agree that this is a good look for the DOE.
Yes, I hear you, and I understand it. And we'll work on this and get back to you.
Okay,
Because this is really important. Sometimes impressions are more important than what's actually happening, and we can't possibly lose the trust of our taxpayers
Sure.
in this important area.
And history has shown that when we don't have these safeguards in place, that opens the door for abuses to occur. And if I could further ask you to do something, the response that the DOE gave to Chairman Williams and I late last night to our letter, I found really inadequate and disappointing. And not because of the content of it, I understand what you're saying, but because we had asked a series of very specific questions about this activity within the DOE that the letter did not address. And we're all on the same team here. No one's trying to light each other up. We're trying to make sure that we set a framework for fruitful collaboration between branches and for trust with the American public. So if I could ask you to give us a response that gives us detailed answers to all the questions we asked, would you please do that?
That's my promise.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize Ms. Lofgren for 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions for you, Dr. Richmond, and thanks to both of you for being here. First, I was really excited to see the President's request for fusion research. It was largely consistent with the authorizations in CHIPS and Science and the Energy Act of 2020, and I think it's the biggest request for fusion ever. So that, of course, we still need to appropriate the funds, but it was very cheering to see that. Having said that, there were no specific funds to establish an alternative fusion energy concepts program that was authorized in 2018. And there's, as far as I'm aware, and you can correct me, there's currently no ongoing DOE program to support research and assessment of innovative fusion energy concepts outside of the public-private partnerships funded by the Milestone program. So I'm wondering, Dr. Richmond, what might be done about that gap. I also want to raise the issue. A number of people have suggested to me that we ought to have an applied energy office for fusion, just as we do for nuclear energy and solar and other technology areas. I'm wondering what you think of that idea. And finally, as I mentioned in my opening statement, it was a delight to be at the NIF on Monday. CHIPS and Science Energy and the Energy Act of 2020 authorized $25 million per year in inertial fusion, but that was before we got ignition. DOE is now proposing a $15 million program for inertial fusion in 2024, which the Secretary announced actually at NIF. And I'm just wondering whether we ought to think bigger on this in terms of R&D now that we've got ignition. And I think you're right. I mean, certainly we don't know which of the very many alternatives are going to be successful in the end, and it would be very premature to choose one over the other. But we also don't want to neglect this element, especially given the success. And, you know, there's so much private sector money going into these companies. Actually, I think there's more money going to the implementation by VCs than there is by the government into science. And I think, you know, the science is actually going to be necessary for those private sector efforts to succeed. I mean, they can't do the basic science that we need to do. The return on investment just isn't there. So I don't know if you could answer those questions.
Yeah, thank you for those questions, and it is a huge success for NIF, and you know, who would ever expected a rapper, MC Hammer, to show up at NIF, right? And ask good questions in the tour, so I understand too. You know, I think what's really important is that I agree with you that it's really important to have other things going on so that we don't cement ourselves into one particular, whether it's the Stellarator or the tokamak, before we really understand. Because there may be something really cool out there that just hasn't made it yet, but they don't have the investments yet because the basic science isn't behind there. So to that end, we've proposed about $120 million for 5 new R&D centers. And these R&D centers are really to think more wildly about what we could do in fusion, not with the constraints that might be imposed by everybody having to go to one facility or the other. So I think that's very promising. We'd love to do more, but we have budget constraints. But fusion, we're so excited to see how much money from the private sector is going into this. Now, to your question about creating now, because of course in my world I have the fusion energy, and then I also have nuclear energy over here, but we don't have fusion energy, we have fusion sciences. And this is something I've been thinking an awful lot about. And where I land right now is, let's just give it a little more thought, because I think there's still, I don't want to get people's expectations so high, because there's so much fundamental work to be done. But I have a senior advisor, Scott Sue, in my office.
Yeah, I met with him.
Yeah, that really ties us over and is always pushing to make sure that we're not.
Well, maybe we can discuss this further
I would like
off agenda, but I looked up how much does America spend on diet soda every year, and it's like $20 billion, which we could replace it with a glass of water. It does pale in comparison to the investment we're making in fusion, which could save the planet. So, Mr. Chairman, my time has expired, and I yield back.
Good example.
I now recognize Mr. Lucas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sir.
Dr. Hogan, over the last 6 months, I've sent 3 letters to the department seeking additional information about a $200 million award to Microvast, a company with well-documented ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Yet the department continues to provide only vague details. Recently, both you and Secretary Granholm have testified before other congressional committees that Microvast has yet to receive any money, but they are still in the running to receive this award. Can you confirm that Microvast or any other entity with improper ties to the Chinese Communist Party will not receive any federal funding from the department?
Yes, I can confirm that.
Thank you. Is the department reviewing its processes to ensure that this sort of confusion around the selection and awarding of receipts does not happen again?
We are doing a number of things here. One, you are pointing out that when we do a press release to say that a set of applicants have been selected, that what that does mean is they have been selected for negotiation, and that is our opportunity to really double down on due diligence. And that's not to say we don't do due diligence before the selection. We vet before and we vet after, but that negotiation process is actually an extensive process of its own. Those of you that follow the battery work may note that we said who the selectees were in October of 2022, and we sit here today soon to announce who the actual recipients are that we will have solid contracts with. But as you can see, there's an extensive process that goes on to further vet and nail down many of the details that go with providing this funding to recipients.
I very much appreciate that, Doctor. And in those letters that the committee send out, responding affirmatively and thoroughly would be appreciated too. Dr. Richmond and Dr. Hogan, as you know, the IIJA and the IRA authorize the DOE, isn't that amazing how that works, to establish the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations and appropriated more than $27 billion to this office. DOE placed the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations under the authority of the Undersecretary for Infrastructure, but kept most of the department's other demonstration activities and core R&D programs under the authority of the Undersecretary for Science and Innovation. The massive influx of funding for an entirely new office under a siloed management structure raises concerns about DOE's ability to administer and coordinate the demonstration projects appropriately. While robust procedures in place without robust, I should say, procedures in place to ensure coordination, taxpayers' dollars will be at risk. That's why I joined my colleague on the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee, Chairman Williams, on a letter to the Secretary last week requesting more detailed information on DOE's energy demonstration coordination activities. So, Dr. Richmond, Dr. Hogan, can you each describe the specific process or procedures your offices have developed to ensure that coordination between OCED and the relevant programs across the department? Like what metrics, if any, exist for determining adequate coordination between the enterprises? Now's your chance to shine.
Thank you so much. And I'll start and hand it back to Jerry, over to Jerry, and then maybe close at the end, because we coordinate in many ways across what we know as S3, the Office of Infrastructure, and S4, which is the Office of Science and Innovation. We coordinate in long-term strategy. We coordinate in what we need to do around our annual budget cycles and what the challenging problems are. And we coordinate in when we get into the IIJA and IRA. We coordinate provision by provision throughout every phase of the project, from the design phase through the technical review, and selection and negotiation phase. And we will be coordinating when we get to the point of project management, bringing in the technical expertise across the programs, and again, at all those levels. And really, Jerry's been managing a lot of the cross-cutting coordination work, which I'll turn over to Jerry.
Well, Kathleen's right. Maybe you could call us the Undersecretaries 3.5. Because we really are connected, and we have daily meetings. Our staff have daily meetings with each other, and you can imagine that there might be some kind of impedance mismatch between the two, because this is a new setup and my area has been there for a while. But it's not. It's people really understand the mission to be carried out, and so we really are highly coordinated in ways I haven't seen at other agencies. So this siloing just isn't there, and I think it's partly because we're starting up a whole new section, which is and a whole new part of DOE, which is exciting, and it provides an exciting opportunity for people in my team to coordinate with their team, with because a lot of the technical expertise is in our area, and we don't want to be making decisions that may not have the technical guts behind it, and that's why we both agree that it's so important to stay connected.
If the chairman will indulge me, I've been here for a while, and my name's not John Dingle, and this is not the famous committee he had, but the magnitude of resources that you've been entrusted with at the department are such, we have a very strong obligation to be very focused in our oversight, because there are going to be other big, bold things we need to do in the near future, and we have to demonstrate success here before we'll be trusted again to make these steps forward. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the indulgence.
Sir. Move on to the rest of the committee, and starting with Ms. Ross. Recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to you and the Chairman Obernolte and the two ranking members for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. And the reason why we're here today is because last Congress we passed landmark research and development legislation, including the IIJA and the CHIPS and Science Act, and also the Inflation Reduction Act, which affects the Department of Energy. And communities across this country, including in Wake County, North Carolina, which I represent, and the Research Triangle Park, already have started to benefit and move our country forward thanks to many of the programs created in these laws. And I'm very excited to hear your report on what's been going on. I'd like to focus my remarks today on the topic of technology transfer. We spent a lot of time on this committee debating the federal government's role in supporting scientific research and development, but we spend less time talking about how we can ensure the investments we make in research have an impact on the everyday lives of Americans outside of the labs. I know you both are very familiar with this concept, and I'm proud that the Energizing Technology Transfer Act, a bill I led last Congress, was signed into law as part of the CHIPS and Science Act. This bill authorized sweeping technology transfer mechanisms at the Department of Energy. Can you speak to how the Department of Energy is implementing these tech transfers provisions, and let us know what resources you might need to do even more?
Well, thank you for that question. Kathleen and I can both go after that one, but we've got the OTT office, which is the Office of Technology Transfer. If I got the last T right. We do acronyms quite well. And OTT is really out there in terms of working on both of our sides, but also out in the communities, working with industry, working with the entrepreneurs. We have huge entrepreneur programs at all of our national laboratories, and so they're pulling those together also in order to get this out to things to be commercialized, while also creating the next generation of entrepreneurs at all levels, from laboratories and also universities. So, Kathleen, if you want to add. Yeah. So
Are there any concrete differences that the CHIPS and Science Act made to help you do that?
Oh, absolutely. So in particular, in the area of microelectronics and advanced computing, in those areas, the emerging technologies areas, these are ones that DOE has had equities in for decades. We have the largest high-performance computing and the only exascale computers in the world. And all of these are really folded into what we do in our laboratories, but also then can be that have to do with the CHIPS and Science Act, but they are part of what OTT is pressing forward with too. So all the microelectronics areas, all of the user facilities that we have, they're doing out there letting people know that we've got these so that people can take advantage of them. And a lot of that is the science that's funded by the CHIPS and Science Act, that's authorized, I should say, in the CHIPS and Science Act. And so we're ready to go if the money gets appropriated. But OTT is funded at this point.
Okay. On a different topic, the U.S. needs to have a viable battery material processing industry to enable our clean energy future. And I'm encouraged to see this administration making headwinds in this area. Can you speak to the status of the program and others related to the battery supply chain?
Absolutely. So, there'll be a number of opportunities that we have to, execute on the direction from Congress around the battery supply chain. One of the best known provisions is the $6 billion provision around battery material manufacturing, processing, et cetera. That's the one that we've already been talking about a little bit, where we have advanced a FOA for $2.8 billion, and we're in the process of negotiating the first set of awards with very good attention to ensuring that work is for companies that will be doing that work here in this country and without exposing us to any type of unnecessary risks. We expect that there will be a next solicitation in a matter of months for the other big part of that funding. We've also been doing a fair amount of work in this space through the Loan Programs Office, leveraging increased scope that Congress gave us in the last few years as well, with a number of important new projects being stood up across the country in that area. So those are the ones I'll profile for you, unless you have other questions.
No, thank you. My time's expired, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Ross. Now recognize my colleague from Texas, Congressman Babin, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, ladies, for being here. Excuse me, Dr. Richmond. America's largest utilities, energy producers, agricultural companies, financial institutions, and other leaders are increasingly making carbon capture a fundamental pillar of their long-term business strategy. Companies like ExxonMobil and Occidental Petroleum have made significant investments in this technology and have estimated the global industry could create $3 to $5 trillion of market by 2050. Just last week in my own district, I visited the Net Power facility in Houston, Texas, a carbon capture pilot project and the world's first large-scale supercritical carbon dioxide power plant that plans to make and is making clean power using natural gas while producing zero emissions. It's amazing. And as mentioned earlier in your, some of my predecessors' questioning, fusion is certainly an exciting, game-changing, potential energy producing technology, but this energy technology with zero emissions is already happening. We just need upscaling to make sure that happens. And so, Dr. Richmond, how can DOE support private industry in these endeavors?
You should be a proud Texan indeed for this, because it's amazing how the field is going, and so quickly in this area.
Yes, ma'am.
In my area, of which I oversee the carbon capture area, there are a lot of fundamental challenges yet to be solved. Nevertheless, companies like this taking it to run and to go further are really important. So, of course, our role in my area, and then I can turn it over to Kathleen, is to make sure that for other companies, not just the biggest ones, but for other companies, so that we de-risk, we're able to do some demonstration projects that de-risk some of the hardest. And the hardest is really just to pull CO2 out of the ambient air, as opposed to next to some factory that is putting out a lot of CO2. So with our demonstration projects in conjunction with OSED over in Kathleen's area, it's really to be able to get it more into the private sector. But we've just got to get that moving a little bit faster. Kathleen?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes, and this is another area where Congress has given us some really powerful tools to do that next step, the demonstration and deployment step, and we do have solicitations in process, largely to do what's critical in this space, which is called these front-end engineering designs, right? Let's get in, let's do the engineering around the carbon streams that are somewhat different from location to location, just to know what you really need, cost it out, and take it the next step. We've got very active engagement from industry, because everything that we're doing in the Office of Infrastructure has a really substantial cost share from the private sector, a lot of skin in the game from the private sector. So they're coming to the table believing it's going to work, and we'll be there to do that with them.
Exciting to think. I appreciate both of you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I recognize Ms. Salinas from Oregon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the chairs and ranking members for holding this hearing today. And thank you to Dr. Hogan and Dr. Richmond for being with us. So, as you know, distribution system transformers are critical to the national electrical grid's reliability, but they are in extremely short supply. The shortage is impeding efforts to modernize aging electrical grid infrastructure in Oregon and is leading to delays and even cancellations of some electrification projects. Notably, procurement times for a new distribution level transformer have reportedly risen to more than a year, up from about 3 months in 2020, and average costs have at least doubled. So, Dr. Hogan, this question is for you. What can the department do to address the transformer shortage? And are there existing IRA or bipartisan infrastructure law authorities the agency could leverage, or are new programs and/or funding mechanisms needed?
So we're using all the tools that we have. Certainly, we've been involved in these conversations now, just like you have for many, many, many months, if not years. So we're looking at all the tools that we have. Engaging with the industry. As we look at the bill in IRA that we have, one of the provisions that we think could help here is the work we are doing in support of the IRS around the 48C tax credit. That's something that will be hitting the streets in the next few months, so that's one thing to look for. Another thing is, we'll just go back to our FY24 budget request. We have advanced funding requests in there, a funding proposal that we also think could help. This is a hard problem. We keep saying, is there a silver bullet here? There really isn't a silver bullet, but I do think there's additional tools we could bring to the table as we try to leverage what we have, and again, there's the FY24 budget.
Thank you. Dr. Richmond, I also just briefly want to discuss how DOE is helping U.S. entrepreneurs innovate and scale up new clean energy technologies. As you know, the CHIPS and Science Act directed DOE to establish a clean energy incubator program to competitively award grants to clean energy incubators. clean energy incubators and accelerators across the U.S., including the Cascadia Clean Tech Accelerator in my home state of Oregon, are helping to bring new innovative technologies to market and really catalyzing the development of new industries. So, Dr. Richmond, can you outline the department's plan for standing up the Clean Energy Incubator Program and the need for congressional funding for it?
This is really an important issue, and it's one that sits both in the Office of Technology Transfer, the OTT office, and the strategy that they're doing to develop liftoff reports to really get further in giving people advice and individuals advice as well as companies advice in how to do more in terms of the transfer of knowledge to the private sector. And so all of that is tied together with what's happening at OTT, but we also have a lot of, as I mentioned before, we have a lot going on at our national laboratories with regards to the entrepreneurship programs. That's been a high priority for the Science Advisory Board for the Secretary to figure out how we can make sure that all of our entrepreneurial activities are coordinated together so that not everybody's all running off in a lot of different directions. So we have a number of different ways that we're going forward with this. Kathleen, is there anything you'd like to add? Yeah.
Thank you both.
Yep.
I yield back.
Thank you. We're going to stay on your side of the aisle there, and I now recognize Ms. Lee from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A pleasant surprise. And thank you, Dr. Hogan and Dr. Richmond, for your attendance today. I'm really proud my district in Western Pennsylvania is home to one of 3 Department of Energy National Energy Technology Laboratory sites. NETL conducts groundbreaking research, several fields that our nation's clean energy future relies on. I was pleased to see that DOE's Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management will provide $150 million in funding through the IRA to improve lab infrastructure. This critically needed funding will support infrastructure upgrades, enhance research capabilities, and expand 2 research and development programs at the Pittsburgh site. These programs will work to convert carbon to combat climate change and develop critical materials products and processes for our major industries. The economy of Western PA has been reinvigorated by the expansion of our technology sector, and I'm interested to hear more about how my district, PA 12, and this region can be essential to the development of our nation's renewable and clean energy economy. So, Dr. Richmond, how can we, as members of Congress, help to translate what new clean energy technologies will mean in our communities on a day-to-day basis?
Well, thank you very much for that question, and we are very proud of NETL. We're very proud of what NETL does for the nation, but I'm just really excited about the money that's going from into your infrastructure and laboratory modernization upgrades. This money has not only been essential for NETL to be competitive, but also other laboratories too. You know, a lot of what we're doing in the Department of Energy with all of the funds that we've got is to make sure that no one is left behind. No region is left behind. No rural region, no inner city region is left behind. And we take that into account every time that there's any kind of a FOA that's sent out. Kathleen can expand on this too. I actually grew up on a farm in Kansas, rural area, so I know, and it was just back there last week, and I know what it feels like to be left behind. And we've got to make sure that we are hitting all parts of the country when we have these build-outs of the funding and opportunities. And Kathleen can say a little bit about the FOAs with regards to the information that we send out that we're requesting from companies if they're going to ask for us money, that they have to be paying attention to this.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, one of the innovations we believe we brought to the table through the work that we're doing at the Department of Energy in these major solicitations that we're putting out the door includes something called a community benefits plan that the applicants need to provide to really show how the work that they will be doing will engage the community and benefit the community, bring jobs to the community, and really get to some of the hardest hit parts of our country. So we're excited to see what applicants are bringing forward, committing to, and then seeing it be stood up.
Thank you. The CHIPS and Science Act has emphasized regional innovation hubs. Why is it critical that we continue to diversify the socioeconomic makeup of where innovation happens? Yes, ma'am.
Why is it important? Well, because we need the help. We need the workforce. We need and they need to come from everywhere. They need to come from everywhere. And I have to say right now, having, been teaching at universities for nearly 40 years, I have to admit, I have never seen young people so excited about being involved in something that's going to make the difference in their communities, and especially on climate. We're getting incredible applications for young people that are really interested in changing their jobs to come over to DOE and work because they want to make a difference. And we can't leave anybody behind that's in an area that they have felt left out before.
Thank you. Really quickly for either, how has the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration helped streamline the commercialization process of hydrogen derived from renewable energy sources? And quickly, if you could provide an update on the selection process of hydrogen hubs authorized by the bipartisan infrastructure law.
Yeah, so first, just the theory of the case for the hydrogen hubs, right? Because we use this word demonstration, I think, in a few different ways, right? So you can demonstrate to de-risk technology. What are we doing with the hydrogen hubs, following on the direction that we got from Congress? We're de-risking a business ecosystem to produce and use hydrogen. So that is a way to rapidly commercialize what is there to do in this country around hydrogen. So we're very excited about what the hydrogen hub effort can do. And we are right now in the throes of reviewing the applications. So they're in the door. And we expect to be at a point of saying who the selectees are for negotiation by early fall.
Thank you. I yield back. That's my time.
Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Tenney from New York for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairman Williams and Co-Chairman Obernolte, Ranking Members Bowman and Fushi, for holding this hearing. Thank you to the witnesses. Sorry I missed some of your testimony, but this is an important issue for me, as all of the nuclear power plants contained within the state of New York are now in my district in New York 24, home to 9 Mile Point, Gannett, and Fitzpatrick, all along the shoreline of Lake Ontario. And I just have a question. As New York rushes to its 100% clean energy by 2040 goal, the fact remains that only one carbon-free energy source can currently support our baseload electricity needs, and that's nuclear. However, we continue to unfairly prop up wind and solar with all kinds of subsidies, which haven't proven that they can get beyond intermittent power. They destabilize many of our power grids, and we end up with this patchwork approach to energy, which allow these sources to win in the marketplace, but not on their own merits. And anyone that comes to upstate New York and sees our beautiful farmland can understand that. If these energy sources cannot currently compete, we must allow further research and development, not prematurely push adoption of technologies that are unready, and our communities are not ready to go to 100% electrification at the pace that New York State is imposing. My first question is for Dr. Hogan. And it's unfortunately politics, bad energy policy. 3 clean Indian Point reactors in New York were shut down prematurely. The Department of Energy has a program funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law to try and prevent future permanent closures for plants that are not profitable due to bad market conditions. However, my understanding is that only 1 plant in California received funding, and there are currently no other plants that are anticipated to shut down. Do you anticipate future plants that will receive this funding?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. As we have stood up the program, again, authorized, provided to us by Congress, the Civil Nuclear Credits Program, we have stood it up in phases, and the first phase really was for a set of reactors that had already announced that a planned closure. We are going to have additional rounds of the Civil Nuclear Credits Program. Okay. $6 billion were provided. And we actually have a second round, I believe, out for solicitation now. Again, with a more flexible conditions under which they can apply, and there will be future phases as well. So,
okay, great, thank you. And so we'll be consuming a fair amount of that funding, and the credits on that funding, right? We'll be consuming those hopefully.
Yes, and
that project.
This Well, the
Yeah.
funding for the Civil Nuclear Credits Program stays available until expended through 2030-ish.
Okay.
And again, so we have conditionally awarded 1.1 billion of the 6 billion, so there is a substantial additional amount of funding. We also do understand that some of the nuclear facilities will avail themselves of the tax credits that have also been provided by Congress. So there's a few tools that are out there for nuclear facilities.
Okay, great. Another quick question on the 9 Mile Point Hydrogen Department of Energy pilot project. There's been a debate emerging on whether, among clean energy producers in the academic community, about what should qualify as clean hydrogen for the purposes of the IRA, tax credit included in Section 45V. Would you agree that projects like the 9 Mile Point energy pilot using existing nuclear power are clean and should qualify for the highest credit under law?
I'm going to look for a lifeline.
Be quick, because I got more questions.
Sorry. So this is actually something that IRS needs to comment on. Certainly we can advise technically, but we really need to leave this to IRS.
But isn't it more an energy issue that could provide guidance to the IRS, so then we can know that that's a legitimate form?
So,
that's what we're
yeah,
really
so
asking.
this is all being worked through, and we do hope that there'll be clarity around this soon.
Okay, and this will go to either Dr. Richmond or Dr. Hogan. According to U.S. Energy Information Administration, biomass energy can be a carbon-neutral energy source, as the carbon dioxide captured during the biomass's lifespan is almost the same as carbon dioxide released when it's burned. However, New York State no longer counts biomass as a carbon-neutral energy source, which has led to Fort Drum's biomass energy plant to close. Do you agree with New York State that biomass should not qualify as a carbon-neutral energy source? Either one of you can answer that. Or actually, both would be great.
You know, that's new to me. I would have to look into it and get back to you on it,
All right,
Kathleen.
thank you.
Same, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I mean, Fort Drum there's 30,000 ecosystem there of people, with 17,000 soldiers looking for an expansion, 100% using the biomass plant, forced shut down by New York State, and now they're pushed onto our energy grid. This is a significant energy expenditure. I just would love to get an answer on that. If you could maybe provide me with an opinion or an answer through an expert, we'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, because that's concerning. I can understand why that's concerning to you, so we'll get back to you.
Thanks so much, appreciate it. I yield back.
I now recognize Ms. McClellan of Virginia for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here with us today. The historic investments made by the Biden-Harris administration and the 117th Congress through IIJA, the IRA, and the CHIPS and Sciences Act are already having a huge impact in the Commonwealth of Virginia and in my district. And I want to focus some of my questions around those specific investments. Last week, I had the opportunity to visit the Thomas Jefferson National Accelerator Facility, which is a DOE Office of Science National Lab that conducts groundbreaking research around using the continuous electron beam accelerator facility to really understand the smallest particles of matter. And I learned more about nuclear quirks and all of that. I was having flashbacks back to high school physics. I was pleased to see the Jefferson Lab receive $76.5 million in federal funding through the IRA, a portion of which will be used to help understand electron scattering and unleash scientific advancements as a result. Dr. Richmond, could you provide an update on the deployment of this funding to Jefferson Lab and how the IRA funds are supporting the critical infrastructure needed to advance our understanding of nuclear physics?
Absolutely. First of all, we are very proud of JLab and TJ Lab, and we're really excited that the IRA has been allowed really some of the upgrades that they critically needed, in addition to the renovation and expansion of CBAF. And it really goes into, you know, whether it be quarks or muons, whatever it is, you know, we may think they're kind of funny names, sort of like cartoon characters, but they are the essence of understanding the universe. And with this accelerator facility at JLab, they really are, they are a huge asset to the other 17 national laboratories that we have, because, you know, the accelerators are just the basis behind how we do a lot of different discoveries. And so I know that we have money going into that expansion, but I also have just a list of the other things that are going in that I don't need to read to you, but they're going to JLab. But let me tell you that we're really proud that that IIRA has been able to step up and help fund what we see as one of our most promising emerging laboratories.
Yeah, and part of that funding is also going to support expanding the main building and conference space to house staff, students, and visiting scientists. I would say that supporting the National Lab staff is critical to ensuring that we maintain a robust scientific enterprise for future generations. For both of you, can you talk about how federal funding from IRA supporting the National Lab workforce, how it's being used to support the workforce, both at Jefferson Lab and the other labs in the country?
Well, the IRA money isn't really for workforce as much as the Office of Science money goes for workforce. It's more for infrastructure. But we know that if we don't get these labs built up and the highest quality, we will not be able to attract the best scientists.
Well, and I think that's the point, is that unless you are offering them state-of-the-art labs where they can do the work that they need to do, they're not going to come.
That's right.
Yeah.
You got it. And they'll go to other countries, and we can't afford to have them go to other countries.
That's exactly right. Switching topics, Dominion Energy, which is a large electric utility serving more than 7 million people in 16 states, including Virginia. The investment spurred by these bills have spurred billions of dollars in private investment in Virginia, particularly in grid modernization and security efforts and offshore wind. Dr. Hogan, how is the Department of Energy supporting national grid modernization efforts like those made in Virginia?
Yeah, in many ways, what the IIJA and IRA brought us are a number of tools to expand our grid, including through a bundle of provisions that we've rolled out as our Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership Program, or GRIP, which is a $10 billion program that allows us to partner with utilities, industry, and others to implement a whole variety of things to smarten the grid, harden the grid, and do other things to boost resiliency and reliability. So excited about that, as well as other tools that help us build out transmission spines for the country.
Thank you. Ms. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Karsten of Illinois for 5 minutes. Sorry. Oh, Mr. Caston. I'm sorry. I just threw in a couple extra syllables.
Someone from Illinois, yes, now it's really recognized. Thank you both so much for being here. I especially appreciate that you're here, given how timely it is, given the announcement from Mr. Podesta yesterday and some of the transmission permitting reform bills, which I am partial to, not least because Mike Levin and I have been working on a fairly comprehensive transmission reform package. A lot of what was in the White House's recommendation is consistent with what was there. Not everything, so we're going to work with the White House to figure out the missing pieces. But a lot of what's there, at least in the request to Congress, I think affects agencies that are under both of your control. So I'm going to sort of focus on that point. The first question is for you, Dr. Hogan. There seems to be an intimation, which I'm refreshed to see, of the intent to use your authority under 216H for the DOE to be the permitting authority, sort of a sole source permitting authority for new transmission. I'm wondering, do you have the resources to carry that out, given how much transmission is in the queue right now that needs to be built out, and should we be thinking about that when we get to budgeting?
We'd be happy to have that conversation. Certainly we have a good down payment on those resources, but we'd be happy to have a fuller conversation.
Okay. For the rest of my colleagues here, there's about 2,000 gigawatts of generation in the queue, of which 86 is fossil-fired and the rest is zero carbon that needs transmission. So the beginning, middle, and end of permitting is transmission. The second one to you, Ms. Richmond, NREL did this SEAMS study back in 2020, identifying all the parts of the grid that are, bottlenecks and need to connect these various regions. I have heard from my friends in the private sector that there has been some less than fulsome cooperativity between the ISOs and the RTOs and getting those in. I just wonder if you can speak to how good a job are we doing at deploying the capital to debottleneck those parts of the grid that were identified in that 2020 SEAMS study.
That's a great question, and trying to unstick the bottlenecks is something that we worry a lot about. With regards to NREL, and in fact, NREL is not only doing studies like that, but it's also doing a lot of work with regards to making sure that we have the innovations necessary to get through some of those bottlenecks. There's still much more that we can do in this area, but I'd be happy to work with you more to figure out how we can go forward.
Well, I guess the concern, and this goes to my jokey part at the start about things that Congressman Levin and I have put in that I'd like to see in the White House package, is that to the extent that we are failing to make those upgrades just because we're lacking the dollars or the technical resources, that's all within the remit of DOE.
Yeah.
To the extent that they're not going forward, because as we know, the governance structure of RTOs and other matters are, I say this as someone who used to spend my time in the power industry, you make a lot of money when you're sitting on a congested power node. The incentives are wrong.
Yeah.
And to the extent there's an economic incentive problem, I think it's important that we address that. And so my question for you is this a problem that is solvable solely within DOE's jurisdiction, or do we need to take more of a whole of government approach if we're actually going to debottleneck our grid?
Again, I think we'd be happy to come up and have that conversation with you. One of the things I can also add, though, is through our GRIP program that I spoke about a few moments ago, we are seeing some very interesting inter-regional transmission connectivity that we do think can address some of these issues. So there's some good starting pieces there.
Okay. Well, related to that, and I'm trying to figure out how much time I have left here. The grid deployment office has famously fantastic resources on the technical side for power systems modeling and interconnection, and I have a lot of scars on my back from trying to interconnect assets onto utilities grid where an economic problem manifests as a technical problem. And it's hard when the person who has the economic incentives is using technical justifications. And so I'm wondering, and this is a big picture question, are there ways that we might better use the grid deployment office to provide a technical resource on the interconnection and the system analysis and take that process out of the jurisdiction of people who may have some economic conflicts until such time as you or FERC or the Congress can fix the economic conflicts?
I think we're happy to explore the tools that we have and better understand the scars that you have as well.
You don't, trust me.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So we're happy to have this conversation and figure out how our tools can help address these issues.
Including the Office of Electricity, which is in my area too.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to work with you on this.
Happy to do that. I mean, well, my general sense is that we have this enormous opportunity because every time you bring cheap energy onto the grid, people are happy because they pay less for energy, except for the fact that people who get paid to sell energy would, like every widget manufacturer in the world, they want widgets to be expensive, right? And you've got the technical resources. I think with some creative legislation we can fix it, but we don't have time to wait 10 years for another energy bill.
No, let's figure out a way to get forward with this.
Okay, thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you. Staying with Illinois, Mr. Sorensen, I recognize you for 5 minutes.
I want to thank the subcommittees on energy and investigations and oversight for holding this hearing. I'd also like to thank our witnesses for their willingness to testify before us this afternoon. And before I go any further, I'd like to offer Dr. Hogan a few seconds. Would you like to clarify an earlier response to Mr. Lucas's question on microvast?
Thank you for that opportunity. I think Mr. Lucas asked me to confirm that the Department of Energy would not award dollars to any potential awardee that would put dollars at risk relative to a foreign entity of concern, and that's what I was confirming. I was not trying to make a comment on any particular award, so hopefully there was no confusion on that point, but thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. The 117th Congress passed 3 landmark pieces of legislation, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, CHIPS and Science, and the Inflation Reduction Act. These bills made a once-in-a-generation investment in sectors of our economy, including infrastructure, energy, climate resiliency, which being a meteorologist is important to me, and technology. But we've got to focus on the implementation, which is why I'm excited to have both of you here today. As we know, making the news cycle today, we are rapidly approaching the debt ceiling. There are proposals to address the debt ceiling by freezing funding back to the 2022 level. So for both of you, how would this decision impact these 3 signature pieces of legislation that are already having the positive impact in our communities?
Wow. Well, I have some numbers. I have some numbers because we did some calculations on this. If we go back, for example, to a level at which we're at the FY22 levels, in the weatherization area, it would be a $62 million cut, which would mean 12,000 less low-income families that could take advantage. In rebates, this is all for consumers. It's really American consumers would be hit by our calculations of about $1 billion. Office of Science, this is really just a travesty for the Office of Science. If we go to the 22 level, it would be it would get to a significant reduction in what the Office of Science can do, and in particular the laboratories. It would be a huge hit on the laboratories, going from what we're putting in the 24 budget of 8.8 back to 7.5. That would reduce the scientists that we fund by 5,200. We can't afford 5,200 loss of scientists when we need them so desperately. And also, that would mean we have 30,000 users that use our laboratory facilities every year from all states. That means that those users, we would cut back on those facilities. So 2,600 users would have to go overseas to use light sources and different other possibilities. It puts us, I think what's most concerning to me is that just when I think we're starting to, we've seen China rise with regards to what it's putting into its facilities. They're trying to build laboratories like ours, modeled after ours, just at a point where we're able to update our laboratories and have the workforce that at least is getting it closer. They're just going to leapfrog right over us if we do that, both in emerging technologies as well as in this area too. And so I think with the IRA tax incentives, it would be a huge blow to competitiveness just as we have this momentum to go forward. And overall, we see that we calculate about 780,000 jobs lost by 2024. But those are our calculations. It would just be, and this is your job to do this, but it's
Right.
our job to worry about people and the workforce and competitiveness.
Dr. Hogan.
Yeah, no, I think, it's interesting to sit here at this point in time with the IIJA and IRA in front of us. And really, why are they here? It's because of this amazing opportunity we have right now to regain manufacturing and build jobs. So it's great to be working on this, but that is today's time, and it's the time to take advantage of this opportunity, right, which only comes around every now and again. So what would be the impact of our offices in this new Office of Infrastructure? If we went back a couple years, we would undo some of the capabilities we're trying to build out around securing the clean energy supply chain for so many of the technologies that are the technologies of the next coming decades. So it's, very important capabilities like that. It's the improvements we've been able to make to our tribal energy program, which has grown substantially in its budget over this period of time. And it also will affect our ability to do the types of things we've just been talking about in this committee to address interconnection type issues, permitting issues. Again, we hope there's a congressional solution on permitting, but until there is, we're using the tools we have to make progress there, and these types of budget cuts would not allow us to do that.
Well, we have to make sure that America is leading the way.
Yeah.
And I hope that we can find the consensus to believe in that. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I think we have covered a lot of ground today, and we're going to be winding up for the day. On behalf of Chairman Obernolte and Ranking Member Fushi and myself, I want to thank you very much for your valuable testimony. I want to end where we started, which is an unprecedented amount of money that will be flowing through DOE and the incredible responsibility of the future of energy in our nation and how that impacts everybody, every place in America, at every stage of life, and every economy. So again, thank you for your time. I also want to thank my colleagues for their questions. The record will remain open for 10 days for additional comments and written questions from members, and this hearing is adjourned.